Religion and politics, two topics that you should likely avoid during your next networking meeting and probably avoid during your next big family dinner unless you really like a side of side-eye with your pot roast. So avoiding these topics when it comes to conversation is usually pretty easy, but what do we do when it comes to our resumes? What if we have worked in politics or religion before, whether it be a job or volunteering, or even studied politics or religion? In this video, we're going to unpack whether or not you should include political or religious work experience, schooling, or volunteering in your resume. I'm Kamara, Toffolo, resume writer, LinkedIn consultant, job search strategist, and LinkedIn top voice who helps established professionals dare to do work differently and land great fitting gigs. I post new videos every week, and my videos will equip you with some of the most valuable job search information to make your job search easier, because job searching shouldn't be this hard. So when making the decision whether or not to share on our resume any political or religious work, volunteering, or schooling, there's really two schools of thought that might come into play. The first school of thought is we want to do what it takes to mitigate any bias. We all have biases in some way, shape, or form. So on our resume, let's do what we can to mitigate the bias of the reader and avoid sharing any political or religious affiliations. And the second school of thought is take it or leave it. I'm bringing my whole self to work, and I'm going to showcase my work in politics or religion on my resume. There really isn't any right or wrong reason when it comes to deciding whether to include your political or religious work, volunteering, or school on your resume. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution. In this video, I'm going to show you how I might approach addressing political or religious work, schooling, or volunteering when I'm working with my own clients. So let's say you actually had a job or jobs in politics or religion. Perhaps you were an intern for a political campaign, or maybe a missionary for a faith-based organization. There are a few different ways that we can tackle this work experience, so let's cover them. The first is we can include the job on our resume. If you're applying for a role where your previous work in politics or religion qualifies you for the role, then you'll definitely want to include this work experience and accomplishments. Also, if you're all about bringing your whole self to work and you're unafraid of the biases that you might face when it comes to your political or religious affiliations, then you might also want to include this work experience. If you are going to include this work experience on your resume, just like any other work experience, you want to make sure that it makes sense to your target direction. And in doing so, what you want to do is use the 5 R's framework to make that work make sense, make the accomplishments make sense. So just to recap, the 5 R's framework is you want to reframe your accomplishments so that they are relevant and they relate to your target job. They reinforce target skills and strengths that are needed in your target job, and they resonate with the target employer. If you are concerned about the biases that you might face and perhaps work in politics or religion doesn't necessarily qualify you for your current target direction, cutting these jobs completely is an option for you. However, cutting a job entirely only works so long as you aren't creating a career gap for yourself. If cutting your job in politics or religion creates a hole in your resume that needs to be filled, then we need to consider other options for addressing this work experience. One of these options is to work on de-emphasizing party affiliation or religion. You could consider renaming your role so that it doesn't really highlight the particular party that you are affiliated with when it comes to politics, or the particular religion you were affiliated with if it was religious work. When going this route, you could consider anonymizing the politician or political party and instead include the name of the electoral district or the riding in which you work. And if you had a job title that is easily identified as being affiliated with a certain religion, then you could consider changing the job title to something that sounds a little more secular. And finally, you could give these jobs just a single line mention on your resume. This is an option if you want to be really discreet about the job that you held, but you still need it to exist on your resume in order to fill a potential gap. Now let's talk about volunteer work in politics or religion. For any volunteer work on your resume is a nice to have. It is not by any means necessary. Volunteer work is how you spend your own personal time. And it's often very revealing of your personal interests and what you hold near and dear to your heart. So sharing that you volunteered for a particular political organization or politician or religious or faith-based organization can be revealing about your personal interests. So that calls into question, do we really want to open our personal lives up to bias? Let's take a look at Angela Martin from The Office. Angela married Robert Lipton, the Republican state senator. And as a loving and devoted spouse, Angela volunteered much of her time for Robert's political campaigning. Angela was employed at that time as an accountant at Dunder Mifflin. If she were to target a job outside of Dunder Mifflin that was still in accounting, I would recommend to Angela that she cut any mention of volunteering for her husband's campaigning from her resume. It's not just the bias that this opens her up to, but that it really doesn't add any value to include it in her resume. That is, unless she was applying to a role as an accountant or in finance for a Republican political campaign. In this likely one and only instance, her volunteering for her husband's campaign might help. If you volunteered for a political or religious organization, in most cases I would recommend that you cut that from your resume. The exceptions to this are if that work that you did as a volunteer qualifies you for your target job, or if the volunteer work itself fills a career gap. In these cases, you'll want to treat this volunteer experience as actual work experience and consider the various strategies that we spoke of earlier in this video. So let's take a look at studying politics or religion in school, or going to a religious or faith-based school. Studying politics in school is generally regarded neutrally. Many of us don't work in the fields in which we're educated, and political science or political relations are very common majors. My recommendation in most cases if you studied politics is to leave that major on your resume, especially if it helps qualify you for your target job. But what about religious education? Before he worked in HR at Dunder Mifflin, Toby Flenderson was attending seminary, and he was well on his way to becoming a priest, only to drop out of seminary for the woman who would become his ex-wife later on. In pursuing an HR role, would Toby really have needed to include his seminary studies on his resume? And would his time in seminary cause a distraction on his resume as he's trying to move into an HR role? Could it open him up to some bias? I think this is highly likely. But my bigger concerns with keeping his seminary schooling on his resume would be that it would call into question why Toby wants to move into an HR role. My recommendation to Toby would be that so long as it doesn't create a career gap on his resume, that he remove his seminary studies. But what if Toby went to university or college instead and studied something like theology? I would include his degree name like Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science, and I would leave off his major of theology unless it directly ties in with his target job, which is HR, and so we know that it does not. And what if Toby studied HR and graduated with a degree from a faith-based or religious school? I would definitely include the schooling on Toby's resume because it really qualifies him for where he's headed. The fact that he studied at a religious or faith-based school isn't relevant. His degree is. You can't control others' biases, but what you can control is what you share on your resume. If you've ever worried about how your political or religious work, volunteering, schooling, or affiliations are perceived on your resume, I hope that this video really helps you develop and plan a course of action that's right for you. And here's my cue for you. Have you ever worked in politics or religion? Do you plan to share all the details on your resume or aim more for discretion? Tell me in the comments below. As you know, I make a lot of videos, but I also make free guides to help you in your job search. If you'd like to get my free cover letter guide and checklist and my free post-interview thank you messages guide and templates, you can sign up for them. The links are in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, give it a like, share it with a friend, and click on my face. Over there? Or there. And subscribe. And I'll see you next time.